group 1 and 2 combined, correct?
That's correct, I believe. I think they came over to our group unless they started again after those people did.
No, it looked like they stayed out or no one rejoined that. They all just came to us.
Okay, so then we'll
Yeah, I
just,
checked it a couple times. It stayed 0.
okay, all right, so 4.
Keith, are you in the room currently or not on break? I was trying to capture his last sentence when we got cut off. Okay, I'll ask him later.
All right, Naomi, should we get started? Sure. All right. So we have 4 groups, and we're going to start with, rapporteurs reporting back. And I guess we have group 1/2. Who's going to fly the flag to start?
All right, I think that was me. I'm hoping that I will catch all of the things that we discussed. So if I miss anything, please jump in.
Do you want to share your Jamboard or anything? Do you want to share your screen?
I could pull up the Jamboard and you can see why it's hard for me to.
Yep.
And yeah, Naomi, why don't you share? You want to share the Jam? Or yeah, why don't you do it, Drew?
Okay. We're gonna share. All right, are you guys seeing this?
Yep.
Okay, hang on, I'm gonna move it. So are you still seeing it? Hang on.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so our Jamboard extended to 2 pages here. So, but the sum up of this is that part of our discussion was focused on the importance of combining process studies and transects and leveraging things like time series stations where there's lots of data and possibly maybe doing one of the first process studies at a location where there's additional information from historical data, like at a Cal Coffee or a Hawaii Ocean time series or BATS or something like that. There was an understanding that crossover stations are very important. And also that a combination where a transect is used to identify a location for more long-term process studies was also important. Just the realization of that first GeoTraces data set coming through and suddenly showing what the depth profile of iron looked like in the entire Atlantic is striking. And so that understanding and then using that information to drive choices. We also discussed a little bit about how to ID core measurements and whether what's core measurements versus key parameters, realizing that science questions are going to have to drive individual cruise design, but the need to have a set of sort of core measurements and best practices that can be used in actually designing making sure that there's compatibility amongst different cruises. We did get a little sidetracked on methods a bit, but talked about the programs like the IODP that have, you know, core instrumentation and samplers, and the possibility of investing in some ways to support the sampling, like Clio or similar things that can allow us to get lots of water that we need. For community building, we discussed actually the need, this is off topic, but we discussed the need to get more input from beyond OCB to include the importance of measurements in the deeper parts of the ocean, that in thinking about how to design sampling plans. And let's see, what else did I have here? We got sidetracked a little bit in a discussion about how much water is necessary, and issues with timing of sampling, and the realization that time of day is important to consider, as well as how long samples are there. And so there's really important needs for intercalibration. And then as we were finishing up, there was an importance of understanding that we need to make sure that we're not ignoring the physical context. So, you know, quantifying the physics so that we can understand the mesoscale side of things, and realization that a full depth profile is very important for what we're doing. And I think, did I miss anything else that you remember as being really key, Mac?
I was enjoying what Keith was saying at the very end, but he got cut off. Keith,
I know, that's that's when we were starting to talk about physics, and then it was gone.
Are you here, Keith? I think he had this nice point about how he had that yellow sticky there, that where he was saying how Kristen was talking about the SAFE effort yesterday, and it really sort of, from his mind, sort of transformed the iron field and began the iron era. And you know, I think he was about to say, and could the same thing happen for biogeoscapes? Oh, there he is.
Yeah, yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, just that you know, the SAFE had a huge impact on the field, and it was just really interesting to hear yesterday how it was, you know, kind of stressful for Kristen, but you know, those of us out that weren't iron measurers, it was long overdue, and we were really excited to see it happen. And it gave everyone a lot more confidence in the numbers. So I think that could be a key part of this program. And it also did build a community, I think, right? Kristen, would you say? Helped?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, just in general, and I recognize, a lot of intercalibration is already happening in this community. And, but, it provides a way of being inclusive, right? Because then it's accessible and it's no longer just in lab knowledge or a, kind of more transient experience. It's broader. And I think that's like a good kind of, we were trying to get towards in this conversation today towards the why, right? Like we kind of spent a lot of time thinking about like hows and what it would look like. But, from a why perspective, it's really powerful to get out there and show people what can be done, how well it, compares across systems and people and labs and measurements and things.
Hey, Kristen, I'm going to hop in with my chair's prerogative. I think that's so important what you just said. The sort of inclusiveness that intercalibration brings to the table. I also started as a grad student sort of just when SAFE was happening, and it was very much that you had to come out of a certain lab to be able to measure something, and it moved towards there's a way you can demonstrate it and earn your own credentials in the community, and it just very much democratized, I think, the ability to do that science. And I think it's a really important message to think about as we try to build biogeoscapes. Sorry to interrupt. Should we move to group 3, Naomi?
Yeah. Oh yeah, group 3 is the modeling group. And we kind of suckered Scott into doing this. He thought he was just a note taker, but here you go. You got this.
Thanks. Feel free to jump in at any time. So I think that there seem to be sort of like four main ideas. One of them that was consistently said was a really early integration of modelers into the discussion with experimentalists and with observationalists really would help like push the models further and also be a much more powerful approach. And the idea of a modeler's wish list or maybe some additional parameters that would really help constrain models was brought up. And then another thing that I think happens near the beginning is identifying common interests. So there was some notion of like some sort of mechanism for identifying common interests. How do modelers and observationalists know how to like pair up with each other and say, oh, I'd love to work on this problem together. And then also continuous integration between the modelers and the observationalists. So it's not just that you start at this point and then you go your separate ways, but rather you're continuing the discussions throughout the data collection process. And there are some examples about how powerful that sort of continuous communication can be. And then I think another big point that was brought up was a lot of people suggested a workshop or some kind of summer school that would really build bonds between modelers and those interpersonal relationships to really emphasize, but also some room for cross-training. So people who have historically mostly been observationalists and they're interested in modeling and like going back and forth can be really powerful as well. I don't know if I've missed anything, but one thing that I also had in the back of my mind after you just mentioned that, Ben, was I think modeling of all these different fields is probably one of the lowest financial barriers to entry. So I think that that's a really promising or exciting way to increase inclusivity of all the different biogeoscapes programs. I don't know if I missed anything, Naomi, or anybody else who was in the modeling group. Well, I definitely missed things, but those to me were some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, we had a great discussion. I think you did a great job summarizing it. And there was a lot of talk about language as well, how to overcome language barriers and just basically facilitating these interactions. And I think we all got excited about holding a workshop early on now, thinking about it now to start those conversations. Did anyone else from modeling breakout want to chime in on anything we forgot?
Yeah, so I think one thing that a couple people sort of pointed to was some sort of way to, like Scott had pointed out, like some sort of, even if it's just like a directory way to connect modelers and observationalists and lab people, and maybe it's just sort of like a biogeoscapes who's involved project, like sort of list where you can, if you have something that you're looking for, you can look up who's working on that and sort of reach out in a way that's easier than sort of trying to go through person to person, sort of find people that way. I think like even just like something as easy as a directory could be, kind of helpful.
Yes, thank you. That we did talk a lot about that. Also, how to pass wish lists back and forth between what modelers want and what experimentalists want, and just facilitating those conversations. All right, I think in the interest of time, we'll move to group 4. The opportunities to leverage laboratory and experiments and cultures. Do we have a reporter for that?
Yeah, I will report out for our group. So our group was pretty big, 27 people, and generated a lot of really interesting ideas in terms of how incubations and cultures can generate complementary information. And one of the questions that came up quickly in our discussion is, well, where should we draw the line? What should the scope of these experiments be in the context of biogeoscapes, which is primarily this field-based program. And so we identified 3 different areas where it's very clear that incubations and cultures are going to be necessary to complement what's being done. And so the first is providing lab-based rates for models. And so these are going to help inform the relative importance of strain and species level diversity on rates, They can ground truth predicted rates and provide reasonable constraints, and then provide some insight into the temporal and the conditional variability of rates. So these are things that are going to be really essential for developing accurate models, and will have to come from incubations and experiments that probably work iteratively with modelers. The second is generating databases for genes and metabolites that we want to annotate. So there's going to have to be a lot of work coordinating efforts to link metabolites and mass spectral libraries with organisms that can make them. Likewise with gene annotation, there's going to have to be efforts to figure out how to do that in a systematic way for different gene classes. And then finally, this program offers an opportunity to collect resources and new isolates for future studies. And so a lot of the biogeochemical functions in the ocean are probably missing from the current culture collections that we have. And so by going out on these cruises and also isolating viable strains from those studies, we can identify where some of these really large knowledge gaps are, and then pull them into culture and assess their taxonomic diversity and activities in the lab. And that's I think most of the high points of our discussion.
Anyone else want to chime in from group 4 before we move to the last report out?
I'll just say, I think that we also talked a bit about like the challenges of just like overall, how do we leverage these big cruises and also smaller focused studies that are the nature of a lot of lab experiments and incubation experiments. And there's, I think, many ways to sort of deal with that potential sort of like mismatch in scope, but one that was brought up was thinking about the sort of franchise model that has come up before, right, as like sort of a way that some of these more focused but really essential lab studies or incubations might be funded.
Great. All right, and then we'll move to the last group, the rates intercalibration group. Reporter for that. All right, Kim.
Yeah, okay. I thought I'd share a Jamboard so you can browse while I speak. So talking about rates, we were a small group that, kind of one thing was preaching to our own small choir there. We all agreed that rates are this really important component to make sure we kind of get that right, because it's so important for linking the chemical parameters with all of the microbial things that we're measuring, and especially for giving environmental meaning to the omics measures, and it's a link between all of our physical measurements and the modeling. So that's why talking about intercalibration. So there's the general consensus that the details definitely matter, and that we have a ways to go for rate measurements for getting intercalibrated. So some of the important things that we identified that are really important to have a discussion about for each method is killed controls, blanks, filters, material and pore size, time points, because rates are all about time. And so that's one of the key things that actually incorporates both the killed controls and the blanks a lot of times. Are you fitting points to a line? Are you doing one time point minus a blank? So we talked about a couple of different ways that we could build intercalibration, potential to maybe propose an intercalibration cruise. One thing that we thought might have some strong potential was a shore-based mesocosm, where it would be a lot easier. So like a large volume, but it'd be easier to involve a lot more people and methods in a shore-based intercalibration exercise. And some potential for maybe within methods building in some standardized things to have like a subset of your samples be intercalibration samples on any given method. Like for instance, for primary production, maybe you want to be measuring on a smaller pore size than what's usually used, but haven't agreed upon like everybody's going to use GFFs for a few samples so we can intercalibrate across things. And one thing that we thought might work really well was that even if we don't, for some methods, we might not maybe be able to intercalibrate everything, but at least have a standardized form that every protocol would need to identify these things within their protocol. So that would be things like the kiloton controls and the blanks and your filter pore size to just make it easier to see across things what's being measured. And we talked some about what are the core rate measurements that we would want to be able to intercalibrate, and echoing some discussions that groups had earlier in the week, the idea that it's likely to, we'd come up with like a small, hopefully, a set of core measurements that would have the potential to have some really solid discussion about methods and intercalibration, and then leaving room for innovation and groups to add on measurements outside of that. So you can see our list there for some core measurements that we thought were the most important rates to target for intercalibration. So that'd be primary production. There's a lot of discussions to have within that: bacterial production, respiration, nitrogen assimilation and turnover, phosphorus uptake and turnover, iron uptake rates, and potentially incorporating those into nutrient limitation, which has a lot of overlaps with the last group that just talked about potential ways to use that. Think anything I'm missing? Anybody else want to chime in?
I guess one thing I'll add is that I think, there's a lot of recognition that this is complicated and hard to do when you're working with biological communities that can be really transitory. But that I think that even starting down this path is really valuable. That even if you can't guarantee that every measurement's identical, having some standardization and some way to at least sense how different approaches might be still really helps us pull together global data sets, was the sense I had.
Matt.
I just wanted to jump in and introduce Ben Neely, who's here. He's a colleague that we met through our metaproteomic intercomparison, and he's from NIST. Ben, I don't know if you want to say anything or just introduce yourself at least so we can make that connection with everybody.
Yeah, hi, Ben Neely. Some of you saw me already. All these issues are kind of dancing around a lot of what NIST does, this whole science measurement service. And NIST is a small organization, only about 3,000 people, but I would encourage everyone to reach out to people at NIST. I think as a researcher at NIST, we right now are tasked with finding this sort of project to do, and we don't know how to do it or who to talk to. Versus on the other side, you're like, oh, I have this problem. I need someone, like you need NIST. Or someone like NIST. And I'm not saying NIST would do this, but yeah, like you can find people at NIST. I think in a very large sense, I think biogeoscapes could be supported by many different groups at NIST. So yeah, I don't know if that's a solution, but you're dancing all around the things that we do. We just do them in really boring situations and not on boats. So.
Thanks, Ben.
That's fantastic. Yeah, sorry.
And we're miraculously perfectly on time. So I think maybe we'll just go right into the next part.
Sure. Yeah, so thanks everyone. We wanted to have an opportunity at this meeting to hear from some of the voices from one of our primary funders, National Science Foundation, for much of this type of work. And so Mike Saraki has generously agreed to just make some comments, and I think sort of from the biological oceanography program side, and then I think Liz Kenuel might also give some perspectives just from ChemOcean, sort of to help us all calibrate our expectations of sort of how, and of course they're just one potential funder for this type of work, but really valuable voices to hear from. So Mike, if you are here, I think I've seen your
Hi. Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
And Liz, do you want to say hi too? Liz is a new permanent program officer in chemical oceanography. She started about a month ago or so. So Liz?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. As Mike said, I'm relatively new as a permanent program director in ChemOcean, but I did serve as a rotator a couple of years ago. And anyway, I'm happy to be back and happy to be part of this workshop today.
And Liz and I have been talking a little bit about what we want to say, so she might be able to check me if I get off base or if I say something wrong. So, or the things that I forget. So thanks, Liz, for joining. I've been following this process for a few years, and I want to say it's been really nice to observe what you guys are talking about and the kinds of excitement that are being generated by this idea. I'm going to give you a little bit of, NSF's perspective on this. I'm really glad for that the organizers have embraced this open process and really trying to engage a broad group of community and interested people. And I see that reflected in the people who are here, the way the presentations have gone. Things we look at are like, well, when I go back to the office, it's going to be like, well, how many people were there and how big a deal is this? So these things all help. I appreciate you guys, especially the leadership team, for the patience they're taking and the slow process in developing this. I think what we are paying attention to is what you might call readiness. Okay, so we want to see readiness on both internal and external to biogeoscapes. So internal is, have you guys got your ideas really worked out? Can I express what biogeoscapes is in like a 5-minute elevator talk? Or do you guys have, what is biogeoscapes in 3 sentences? And so I think you're in process on that. The other part of that is, writing workshop reports seems like the most boring thing to do, and you may not get a publication out of it, blah, blah, blah. But these are the kinds of things that can help us internally in NSF and in the federal government demonstrate that there's community interest in this and it's something that we should do. Then, several people have heard about or have asked about funding and, how would this be, where would the money come from and how much money would be there? And, we're not really ready to say that yet, but what I would say is that so far it looks pretty much like funding coming out of primarily biological oceanography and some co-funding with chemical oceanography. So that's like our core programs, right? So we, 6 months ago, we thought, oh, maybe NSF will get a big increase in our budget for climate change and maybe we could pitch something like that. Now it's been reduced. So pay attention to the news on funding and what's happening at the highest levels of NSF. And that's sort of what we're looking at. I would say the readiness on the external part is sort of funding opportunities that we see within the agency for this, or within the federal government generally. So we're looking at that and we're looking at what you guys are doing internally and looking for the best match. And we encourage the leaders, for example, to apply for the ExcelNet International Network of Networks opportunity, which is something that can build sort of the national and international strength of the planning for this. We're really looking at it. So I've been involved in lots of big programs. So I originally was in JGOFS and then in GLOBEC, and then I was involved in Tara Oceans and from the inside of NSF with exports. So I'm familiar with how all these things have come about. And if we, NSF, have a particular culture, and that's really looking for bottom-up, community-driven ideas. So if you guys can work on setting some priorities within this realm of ocean biogeochemistry that really justify the investment, then that's sort of what we're looking for. So we're not going to be like NASA, which is very mission oriented and come down with we're going to do this on this time scale and go. And we're not going to be like Tara Oceans, which is privately funded and they could do whatever they wanted. And it was very seat of the pants at the beginning. So I've seen a lot of different projects like this. We're a little bit different and maybe a little more conservative than some of those, but we will be driven by the quality of your guys, focusing of your vision and then matching it to what we see as opportunities for funding within NSF and other partners in the federal government. So I think that's all I want to say right now. And Liz, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think you were pretty complete. I guess just from the chemical oceanography side, I want to echo some of the things that Mike said. Again, thank you to the organizers of the workshop and for really, I think, generating a spirit of openness and inclusivity. I think that serves the community well, and that's the way that the best science will move forward. And I guess I'd also like to say that, as you're moving forward, so inclusivity is good at the beginning, but I think everyone recognizes that eventually you'll have to make some hard decisions about priorities for moving forward. So some things that you can think about when you're making those priorities are like the best ways to leverage investments that NSF has already made. And also, as Mike said, keeping an eye open for future opportunities as those arise. And then, I've been really happy to see kind of the progression of the workshop. So on day one, I was thinking that the scale was very small, thinking about, biochemistry, cellular machinery, metabolomics, but I've been happy to see the progression of moving to processes and also to thinking about how to scale up. So anyway, thank you.
Great, thank you, Mike and Liz. I really appreciate you being here. We wanted to have some time for folks to ask questions of Mike and Liz. If those are, you can, oh geez, maybe put it in the chat. The best way to do that. While people think of their questions, I'm going to ask one just to give people a chance. So I think this is to both of you, Mike and Liz. One of the efforts that we've tried to connect with as a sort of nascent ground up program is the UN Ocean Decade effort. And I'm wondering if there are either within NSF or maybe even more importantly beyond NSF discussions about funding opportunity, ways to try to help fund the UN sort of Ocean Decade from DC. Does that go anywhere, or do you foresee anything that might come out of an organization other than NSF in support of those goals?
I'm not sure we're seeing that yet, but clearly we are engaged with the UN Decade and paying attention. You guys are welcome to put in proposals as you see them relative to, what do they call them? Ocean shots.
Ocean shots. Yep.
For example, and things like that. I have a feeling, a UN, politically, a UN blessing on an activity probably has more weight in other countries than in the US, just to be frank about it. But on the other hand, we want to be engaged, and NSF is engaged with that. So we'll be watching too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jim?
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, Mike, what role do you potentially see for SCORE in this? It's a little bit related to Ben's question maybe, but in terms of trying to, SCORE had a role in geotraces early on, and I was wondering how you felt they could be helpful here.
I think that would be a great venue for the international aspects of this, absolutely, in terms of planning. There's a lot going on, as you saw from Daniela's talk, and in Europe and other places in the world in this realm. And I think I think there's a lot to be learned from what's happening in these other programs too, for us.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I was really happy to see SCORE come up by name on some of the Jamboards. So, you know, I think that's reflective of the potential opportunities that there would be to approach SCORE.
I can add to that. You know, our international ad hoc group has reached out to SCORE already and talked about you know, when to engage them. So, you know, and we've had some meetings with them, and I think that the hope is in a year or so, we'll be ready as an international group to approach them more formally.
Oh yeah, Allison.
Yeah, this is a question I think mostly for Liz related to ChemOcean and GeoTraces. And to what extent has GeoTraces been a catalyst for funding smaller studies that are GeoTraces related? One idea that's come up over the course of the workshop is that there's a large field program that might have a biogeoscape stamp of approval. And to what extent does NSF or does Chemical Oceanography as a program use the existence of GeoTraces to inform what other smaller projects it might fund?
Let's see, that's yeah, that's a place where maybe I have a limited perspective, just having only been associated with NSF for a little bit. But I mean, I think, you know, whenever we make a big investment, whether it's GeoTraces or ocean observing or whatever, where, you know, we're usually very happy to see other projects that can leverage those efforts. So yeah, and you know, I think well, I guess, you know, potentially in the early stages, maybe there could be some opportunities for synergies between biogeoscapes and GeoTraces.
I was wondering if I could make a comment on that, just from the perspective of having seen people outside of GeoTraces avail of themselves of the sort of the methodologies and the experimental approaches. So people outside of GeoTraces can request standard reference material. They can submit analytical results to a common database. They can report those results in their papers, you know, to sort of elevate their credibility. And one would imagine that that would be a big payoff of this program as well, that people who may have smaller scale projects, but are able to plug into the infrastructure that's emerging from this program would benefit a lot from this.
Yeah, Jim, I really agree with that. I think even if your goal isn't to do a large, you know, ocean section, if you can analyze the, you know, mock community at the same time you're doing your other analysis for another study, and then allow it to be comparable or help contribute to this, I think I could imagine being really valuable.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments for Mike and Liz? Or just about funding strategy in general, maybe.
I'll chime in with another question. You know, we've talked about this a little bit, but more, you know, more generally, to what extent are the BO and CO programs willing to entertain intercalibration efforts as sort of a stepping stone as we move forward?
For biological oceanography, I'd say we're interested and ready for that. I think, you know, you would have to write a compelling proposal, and I think that the workshop that you had before the pandemic and the thinking and that's gone into that should hopefully help you make a compelling proposal. So one take-home message I got from today's discussions, and yesterday's, I guess, was reminding me how expensive this could be. So that's good.
We're glad you heard that, Mike.
Well, I think it's real. I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Okay. Well, yeah.
Keith has a question.
Oh, thank yeah, Keith.
It's not a question so much, but you know, one thing I haven't heard mentioned here much is how do we sell this program to the larger oceanographic community? And with GeoTraces, that in the early years, that was always on Bob Anderson's mind. And he would ask us at every meeting that question. Because it is, you know, important to get that larger buy-in if we're actually going to get the program going.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and that's what I was sort of saying when I said the elevator speech, or like getting your vision honed down to some simple statements that have big impact outside of our community, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, just for those, thank you, Keith, for that. For those who are not as familiar with GeoTraces, I mean, from my perspective, GeoTraces aligned on sort of three little elevator pitches, you know, micronutrient limitation, pollutants in the ocean, and paleoproxies. And I think they were, you know, there's a lot of science that fell around that, but they did a good job of really distilling it down to some very easily communicated messages. Yeah. Bethany, see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Liz, for your comments. I think something that we need to be really mindful of in regard to where Mike said a lot of the funding for this program might come from, which is biological oceanography, is that our reviewer community contains folks that aren't oceanographers. I would say that, you know, the CO community is much more coalesced around oceanographic questions, and our reviewer community is, you know, coral reef folks, fish ecologists, salt marsh folks. So I think that, you know, we're gonna see challenges potentially in panel, not only, you know, to our oceanographic colleagues, but really think we're gonna need to sell this to a really broad scientific community. And I think that's something that we should be really mindful of going forward. I might be stating the obvious, but I think all of us that have been in those panels know the diversity of the portfolio that comes out of biology.
Great point. Thank you, Bethany.
I'm gonna just, so I totally agree, Bethany. I think we're online on that. I just wanted to add one other comment before we finish, and that is Ben Neely, who is also a federal employee and more on the research side, but he mentioned the idea that sometimes in the federal government, money appears suddenly. And so we've been talking about this slow and deliberate and patient planning. All right. So the flip side of that is that something could happen in Congress and all of a sudden we have lots of money to spend. So you're going to have to thread that needle in being both deliberate, working out your vision, and be ready to go. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, well, that could be part of the prioritization process, is, you know, identifying some things that are ready to go early on and would be useful in building the vision as you move forward.
Yeah, there again, it's good to remind that GeoTraces actually only had a couple of core things that, you know, they sort of agreed would be measured because not everything was ready to go. And then they, as the program developed, they were able to add more, I think. So you don't need to have everything figured out, probably, hopefully, to start. Great. Anyone else before we, thank you so much, Mike and Liz. Really appreciate your participating here.
Sure, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to move to sort of trying to summarize and have time for discussion and next steps. And I think we're going to start with a Mentimeter poll. Is that what we've got here, Heather? Great. And Naomi, are you going to, well, I'll let you guys.
Yeah, I'll take up after Mentimeter. Yep.
Thanks.
So here's the link. to the first poll. And I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Here we go. Numbers are still rising pretty quickly here, so I'm going to wait until we flatten out a little, make sure everyone has a chance to participate.
Heather, will we be able to see the results of the other one too, or is that going to have to?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yep.
great.
We're up to 63, 65
Oh,
people
right.
have participated. Just get a couple more in there. Great. All right, well, there you have it.
How do we
Right.
interpret this?
So the words that are larger are the ones that were entered many more times. The larger the word, the more popular of a response that it was.
Oh, there were more than one page of this. I thought we were ranking 7 things, and I see a lot more than 7 things.
No, that's the
Oh,
other. That's the other poll.
That's the second
Oh, okay,
question.
I get it. I get it. Thanks.
Interesting.
Intercal is definitely at the forefront of everyone's minds.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about data management. In this meeting. Interesting to see that as third.
There's some talk about needing to have a separate data management meeting. That's one of the things we put into the ASELNet, just because of the huge data challenges we know will be coming down the pipeline.
Well, great. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you much.
So Naomi, are you going to go next, I think? And then me?
Yes, let me share my screen again. Just give me 1 second here. Had to close it out to do the Mentimeter. And you're seeing the correct view?
Yep.
All right, great. All right, so in this final stretch, we wanted to take some time at the end of the meeting to summarize what we've accomplished over the workshop and also take some time to look forward. So now we want to revisit the meeting goals that we had put up at the beginning of on day one. The very first day, we went through a series of talks summarizing the history and current state of the International Biodiversity Planning efforts. If you weren't able to attend those talks, they'll be recorded and made available online on the website, workshop website. I just realized they're all ones. I apologize.
They're all important.
Second point was to try to engage US-based scientists from a range of disciplines. And I feel like our diverse group that has really stayed with us through the whole 3 days, I really has facilitated great discussions. And then the last is to identify US science priorities and ways to contribute to the US and international science plan. So this last point is one of the things we want to kind of focus on in this last discussion. The other thing to come back to is on the first day, Maite Maldonado presented the kind of international biogeoscapes view and highlighted that there's a request from all of these national workshops to answer these 4 questions. And so we wanted to go through them as a group and have a bit of discussion. So we're going to start off for the first question the international group is asking is kind of an assessment of the mission statement, which is stated here to improve our understanding of the functioning and regulation of ocean metabolism and its interaction with nutrient cycling within the context of a hierarchical seascape perspective. And the question is, how can this be improved or modified? And so to best kind of poll the group, we decided that we would do another Mentimeter poll. Unfortunately, Mentimeter doesn't let us have too much text. So I'm going to keep sharing my screen. And then Heather, you're going to put in the chat the Mentimeter. Heather, do we have? Okay, cool. So yeah, if everyone can take a minute to go to that Mentimeter, and you'll see choices to kind of evaluate that statement. Again, for this. And I think Heather, you'll just type in the chat the results. Someone will have to vote for me. How are we on responses?
Am I supposed to be doing something other than saying whether it's good, can use tweaking, or is bad? Is there like somewhere to put in where it can be improved?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Please, yeah, we don't have that as part of the Mentimeter, but please email suggestions. I think that was, or put them in the chat if you would like. Okay. Yes, we are collecting suggestions and yeah.
We're up to 58.
Just so folks are aware, we do also plan to have a very brief post-workshop survey, and I'm sure we will have a box for something like this to add your feedback on.
I think we're stopping at 58. I don't see any more responses coming in.
All right, great. All right, so the second item for the report back was we were asked this question of how our nation, how the US could best contribute to the Biogeoscapes effort. Since we have such a large engaged scientific community, there's obviously many ways that we could contribute. Here's some that we kind of brainstormed last night. Specifically that we are currently leading these calibration and standardization, and we're likely to continue that role. We have a large ship capacity, so we might be able to lead efforts in terms of basin-wide sections. We also have a lot of ongoing time series efforts such as BAT, HOT, CalCOFI, and then the LTR programs, which could be integrated into our Biogeoscapes effort. So we wanted to also open up the floor for any other thoughts of what we could highlight in this part of the response. You're welcome to put it in the chat or raise your hand or speak out what else we could add to this list. And we'll also include in the post-workshop survey all of these questions, so you can add your feedback there if you don't have anything coming to mind.
Yeah, I think our goal is really just if we're missing something, really, that's really come to you over this meeting. That would be, we want to make sure we capture those.
All right, and the third point was what science questions are most important for US scientists within the broad scope of Biogeoscapes. And that we tried to cover in the day 2 discussions, and we have that summary. So again, feedback on those summary slides which are available to you, and any other points that you feel like we've missed in terms of summarizing the conversations that came out of this workshop would be very valuable to send.
Hey, Naomi, Anitra has a question in the chat about who's the audience for our mission statement, which I don't know if any of the other organizers want to address that, but I think it's a really good question, which is worth spending a moment on. My sense is that there are many audiences for it, and that certainly there are audiences in other countries, there are audiences in our funders, audiences in our own community. What do others think?
I guess I saw that similarly about what we were just talking about for how GeoTraces had a very nice cohesive message, and if we can have the mission statement being similarly clear and well articulated, it helps in many different aspects, and exactly as you said, Ben, many communities.
Yeah, I guess I would write it really differently for all of those audiences, but if it's the highest level mission statement, then I think it needs to be in pretty plain language. If it's for scientists in our own community, it's obviously going to be something different.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah, really, really good point. Oh, and there's, comment, that was a great comment to add in the cookbooks and best practices. That's a really great point to add into what we can provide. The last question for this report back was, are there impediments that the international program could seek to mitigate through training or collaboration? And so we definitely focus primarily on US efforts and ideas in this meeting, but it is definitely important to keep the international collaboration, international coordination efforts in mind, and how they this coordination can help. So there's planning for an international meeting in 2023, and we're hopeful that our intercalibration efforts can continue and expand before that meeting. And I think that's one aspect in which the US community can really help contribute. And we tried to put together a table. Maybe I'll stop sharing now and Ben, you can pick up
Sure.
To highlight what we feel has really come out of this workshop is as one of the strengths of the US contribution.
Can you see this table?
Yes.
Yeah, so Mac, maybe you sort of took the first shot at this. Do you want to just say a
Sure, I
few
just tried, this was basically based on a lot of what we heard and saw in the summary reports of parameters that people were thinking about and wrestling with in terms of potentially being useful for a biogeoscapes effort, and then sort of going through of adding a status of what we know about their intercal status at this point. One thing we would love to make sure is that, is there anything we're missing here in terms of things, the decisions of what a parameter list may look like, or if biogeoscapes even has a key parameter list like GeoTraces does, I think is going to bubble up to the international level. But to even be included, I think we need to know that some of these numbers could be robust when compared across international analysts and efforts. One thing in particular is we saw a really big vote yesterday for rates needing to be intercalibrated, and if people would like to elaborate on what those could be, that would be useful.
Yeah, within the group 5 breakout group, we did generate a bit of a list. Kim, I can't remember. Do you have that in front of you? You can just put Kim on them. Certainly, we thought primary production. There were 4 or 5 of them, I think. Respiration, bacterial production.
Yeah, I can put them in the chat.
Yeah,
Does that help?
that'd be great.
Thanks, Elise. Got those. Yes.
Right. Yes, I think that was the main report backs. Again, we'll include that in the workshop, post-workshop survey to get even more feedback. And also thank you so much for the comments that you've put into the chat. We'll kind of synthesize those in the responses.
All right, Naomi, is it over to me?
Yep.
Over to me. All right, I'll share my screen again. You guys aren't sick of my screen yet. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about just sort of some thoughts on next steps, and then we'll have time just to open it up for other questions and comments. As you're aware, we've been recording the talks for the meeting, and so we'll definitely make those available after a little bit of just sort of editing them down, and those will be on, I think, the OCB workshop website, and probably linked to the Biogeoscapes website after the meeting. As Naomi just mentioned, we'll definitely draft a workshop report, and we'll circulate that to everybody here for comment, and then post that to the workshop website as well. And we heard Mike say that those reports are important. They really are. They're read, and they're a valuable record of our community's sort of actions. And then, as Adrian mentioned, also there will be a post-workshop survey that will get sent around, hopefully probably early next week, where there will be opportunities for you to, again, provide additional sort of input, feedback, things we missed, things that we've thought of maybe over the weekend afterwards, and hopefully we can capture as much of that as possible. So just as a reminder, again, we put in this proposal, it has not been funded, so it's still pending. But this is just sort of a reminder of some of the activities that we hope will be supported if it is successful in review the second time around. And just to remind you of sort of both the types of activities that were envisioned and the timescales. And so, workshops and working groups and reports coming out on more about the science, thinking more about the science. And Mac, remind me, how much international participation did we envision in these AccelNet supported activities? Can you?
They're very much designed to be a lot of international engagement, right? Yeah. So, and if the EU cost effort gets funded, they've tried twice to do something that's EU based. There is hope that we could merge those efforts to make them even larger. So that's one of the advantages of the AccelNet, is that it really can support a lot of international collaboration.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. And again, there's intercalibration review and assessment in there, but this is not a proposal that could or will support intercalibration activities. And so there again, this is very much a encouragement for all of us in this community who want to see this happen to self-organize around proposals to do that. I think that will be really important based on the Mentimeter poll we just saw. Yeah, and then also just to emphasize these early career, and that there are funds in this proposal if it's successful to help catalyze interactions between lab groups, between students and early career folks in all sorts of ways that I hope will really help the community congeal. Okay, so I think, maybe, I don't know how much people want to give this feedback in plenary, but certainly we want to have an opportunity to just make sure we're getting the right sense of what the community is excited about for the next US steps. What are we missing in that timeline, or what needed steps are we missing? And just to sort of again to get us all to think about how we'll step up to support this program. I know it can feel a little bit just unclear, right? It's sort of we don't know quite what to do. We've envisioned some steps, but certainly we don't want to send the message that this has all been figured out and we're just walking down the path. So we really ask for everybody's ideas and energy towards this. And maybe we'll have some opportunity. I'll just, when I'm done speaking, we can hopefully revisit these with everybody's input. Two other items here. One, just to remind everyone that GatherTown is the space will still be open, is open for the next few weeks. So looks like Naomi is already in there right now. No, I know this is a screen grab, but yep, feel free to go back. And I think the drink tickets that we've given you are good for at least the next 24 hours at the bar. So please enjoy the efforts that everyone has made to put their posters in GatherTown. And again, finally, to end with just an open invitation to contribute to these efforts, to both develop this and advance it. There's a couple of activities that we've talked about that have already started, some efforts we've put in to getting funding for it. In particular, these two OCB funded working groups that we heard about yesterday on nucleic acid omics and proteomics, and then this CellNet proposal. But I certainly have heard this week about many other opportunities that are out there, rates intercalibrations, principally organic molecule intercalibrations, metabolite intercalibrations, connections between modeling, building international connections. I think that all efforts that each of us can make to build connections and brainstorm ideas with our colleagues who make similar measurements in other countries will really help this community pull together. And also building connections to other fields really within our own country and outside of it. So all ideas for everyone, for all of us to take away from here. And with that, I'll stop talking and we'll just open up the floor for any comments, questions, or suggestions that anyone has. So thank you very much. What? Yes, John. John Casey. Oh, you were clapping.
Some applause.
Well, why
That's what mine is.
Very nice. Make a speech of, no.
And we wanted to also add that OCB has generously opened up GatherTown at high capacity for another until 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. So a bunch of us are thinking of just going over to GatherTown if you want to chat informally and catch up for right after this. And there's free beer there, Jim says.
You've got to find it. It's underneath the octopus rug. Yeah.
Kim?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the organizers and the people who have been sort of spearheading this for what sounds like the last 10 years. Just based on Adrian's initial timeline, this is a massive undertaking and what you guys are trying to foster from the ground up. And I am very appreciative and want to thank you for your time in doing that.
I had a quick question for the organizers and maybe for the larger group too. But when Mike said that at some point you have to cut some people out of the picture because of you just have to prioritize and the resources and so forth. Well, that process did happen in GeoTraces about maybe 3 or 4 years into it, when it became pretty clear that there was not going to be a benthic component or a process component involving, say, sediment traps or something like that. I don't know if there will be a watershed like that in biogeotraces, but at the same time, I haven't really seen too many benthic people here. On the other hand, there are people working on sinking particles. So I don't know what the thought is on that, you know, how things might evolve. If anybody had any response to that.
I don't know if I could try and have a stab at that. I think that's a really key point. I mean, obviously, we don't want scope creep to make the program unmanageable. That said, though, I mean, I think one thing we're seeing in a lot of the multi-omic data is that there is this incredible ability to scale, and an amazing amount of information that can be gleaned. You know, even in some of the EDA results that are coming into our data sets that I saw on some of the posters and things like that. So, you know, there's a potential to do a lot of scope with the, you know, with the parameters that are proposed. And also another thing that we've really been wrestling with is, you know, is it worthwhile to change the model from the geotraces every, you know, 2 to 3 years in the US to something that's more nimble that could then allow a lot more investigators and a lot more young investigators in particular to get involved, and that would also align with the ability for the biological temporal scales that we see, right? And the intercalibration efforts would really then foster those kinds of data types being able to integrate into a program, right? So I think your point's a really good one, Jim, and I think that every country will have to weigh in on that too, what their resources and capabilities are, and then how that will end up affecting the entire scope.
One thing I don't have a sense of is how the international discussions versus national discussions might, you know, maybe contribute to that, just as to use geotraces again as an example, Jim or others. Because obviously the capacities are so different in these other, in many countries, and we need to have, I think, a very international program. Do you or others have insight, Jim, into whether, you know, this push-pull of national versus international goals planned out?
I guess the only comment I would make is that I think if there's a significant European involvement in this that continues, there will be a benthic component in there, just because the MPI in Bremen and the University of Southern Denmark in Odense and a couple of universities in the Netherlands that are like big powerhouses in marine microbiology, they have very strong sediment biogeochemistry groups. Geomar, that's another one. So I do feel like there is very likely to be a significant sediment-based component. And I just want to clarify here that I'm not talking about geomicrobiology. You know, that's a different realm, and I'm not really going there. It's more about people studying benthic processes that have an impact on the biogeochemistry of the overlying water column.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Adrian.
Yeah, so maybe I misunderstood what was being said, but you know, I think Ben, you mentioned sort of capacity building and things like that, and I think, you know, GeoTraces has actually done a pretty good job about capacity building, not just in established, you know, in Western countries, but also throughout the world. I mean, the number of trace metal programs, national trace metal programs that have gotten going through GeoTraces in, you know, South America and Asia has actually been quite significant. And part of that is through holding meetings in those countries and through actively involving those countries. So, the scientific steering committee takes the opportunity to hold meetings in those countries in order to help raise the prestige and raise the visibility of researchers who are working there. And I think that's paid off. Some people who entered the program as graduate students are now running the program on an international level, and that's something that's really nice to see. So I think, and not just sort of from one country, but from a variety of countries. And I think that's a nice thing to see. So I think that capacity building and development of people's careers is something that we shouldn't sort of neglect. I think it's a very important part of any program like this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Really important comment. John, you've taken your hand down. Do you have?
I kind of had a question, but it's kind of like an above my pay grade kind of question. I'm just trying to get a feel for like the scope of this project, basically, and what we can learn from other large projects like GeoTraces and exports, but kind of from like a structural standpoint. Do you have some vision for like a center, a U.S. center that would be kind of orchestrating this project, or is it distributed among a bunch of different institutions? I'm kind of thinking of Seymour. There's a physical building that kind of, and also along the same lines is, do you expect to see kind of calls for proposals sort of internally to BioGeoscapes, or are those sort of filtered through NSF from the outside? Just curious about the hierarchy of things.
Sure. Well, I'll let the other organizers weigh in on what their vision is, but I'll tell you what GeoTraces does. So GeoTraces has a program office which is funded through a core grant from ChemOsh, as I understand it. And so that funds not a building for sure, but it funds time for a director and some administrative assistance, and then quite a bit of travel, to help convene, for example, the steering committee, the US steering committee, and probably participation maybe in the international meetings. So it very much functions as the glue that holds the community together, I think, in ways, but that goes through the core program, through NSF. And then the other, the activities, the cruises that have occurred have been proposals to the core program as well. Though I'm sure they've benefited from the stamp of GeoTraces. They have gone in that route, as I understand it. And Liz or others, or certainly correct me if I'm wrong there, but.
I just wanted to add to that there's also an international planning office based in Toulouse that has been in place since the inception of GeoTraces. And there's also the central data management outfit for GeoTraces is in the UK. So these are, I guess they're physical spaces as well as, institutional, that have staff who, get some support from US sources, actually, and some support from international sources.
Yeah, great point.
I can weigh in with some of our, what we've been thinking so far. And it's really very much based on what we wrote in the AccelNet proposal, which has a management section that really helped us sort of clarify what we were thinking for this. And, our current plan is to have a national scientific steering committee and really partnering with OCB for their administrative support, as well as their sort of guidance from their scientific steering committee to get the US BioGeoscapes committee launched. And then on the international level, that would be a different committee. So there's a lot of modeling of the efforts so far to be parallel to what GeoTraces is, but some differences in that at this point, really aligning with the strengths of OCB in the short term. But there's no money or sense of having internal grants at this time, except for the fact that if the AccelNet gets funded, there's a huge component of it that is sort of early career exchange support, which really might help catalyze this international collaboration, sending young investigators across the world, which would be really fantastic, we think, for launching this.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I'm seeing a lot of Zoom fatigue on the screen, but thanks everybody so much for participating. We've got still 56 people here, which is amazing. And anyone who wants to, I think some of us are going to go hang out in Gather Town for a little while. So please join us. And otherwise, thank you all very much.